If George Patton had not moved when he did, the 101st Airborne Division would not merely have been captured, escorted into captivity, and listed as prisoners of war. They would have been erased, not surrendered, not shattered, eliminated. In the frozen darkness of December 1944, the Screaming Eagles were encircled in a small Belgian town most Americans could neither pronounce nor locate on a map. Bastogne. They were desperately short on ammunition, running out of medical supplies and nearly out of time. German tanks closed in from every direction. Adolf Hitler himself had ordered their total destruction, not their capture. The weather was so brutal that Allied aircraft remained stranded on icy runways. No airdrops, no fighter bomber support, no assistance. Every rational evaluation said no one could reach them in time. Every calculation pointed to the same grim outcome. The 101st Airborne Division was doomed. Everyone accepted that reality. Everyone except one man. This was the EVE moment when Dwight D. Eisenhower, Supreme Commander of Allied forces in Western Europe, realized that George S. Patton might be the only general capable of executing the maneuver required to save the war's most fragile point. It is the story of what he said when Patton actually succeeded. A story of impossible odds, desperate men crouched in snow-filled foxholes, and a single phone call that carried 10,000 lives in 4 brief words. The clock began ticking on December 19, 1944. Inside the Situation Room at Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force, the atmosphere was as oppressive as the winter sky outside. Maps covered the walls and tables. Their once orderly lines and colored pins now transformed into a nightmare of shifting arrows and widening gaps. German forces had smashed into the Ardennes forest days earlier, punching a deep, jagged bulge into the American front. Entire units had been pushed back, overrun, or simply vanished amid the chaos. But it was Bastogne, a crossroads town that had been an afterthought just days earlier, that now dominated every discussion. Intelligence officers delivered their briefings in low, precise voices. The 101st Airborne Division, along with fragments of armor and infantry from other units, was completely surrounded in and around Bastogne. 10,000 American soldiers encircled by German formations that outnumbered them several times over. Artillery ammunition severely limited. Rifle rounds rationed. Medical supplies nearly gone. Wounded men lying in frozen basements and barns with no bandages, no morphine, no heat. German attacks were intensifying, and over it all hung the same brutal reality. The weather had grounded Allied aircraft. Eisenhower stood before the map, his face etched with exhaustion. He had been awake more than asleep since the offensive began. Those briefing him could see how heavily each report weighed on him. He listened without interruption, hands clasped, eyes fixed on the bulge clawing westward from the German border. When the summary of Bastogne's situation concluded, he asked the only question that mattered. How long can they hold? The intelligence officer hesitated. He understood that his answer would be more than an assessment. It would be a verdict. "Sir," he said at last, "realistically, 4 or 5 days. Perhaps a week if everything breaks their way. After that, they will be out of ammunition, out of supplies, and the Germans will overwhelm them." Eisenhower's jaw tightened. The loss of an entire airborne division would be catastrophic by any measure. Militarily, it would remove an elite formation. Logistically, it would complicate the defense of the entire sector. Psychologically, it would be crushing. These were not anonymous units. These were the men who had jumped into Normandy on D-Day, who had fought through the hedgerows and the streets of Dutch towns during Operation Market Garden. They had become living symbols of American resolve, Their destruction would reverberate far beyond the frozen forests of Belgium. What options do we have to relieve them? Eisenhower demanded. The answers were grim. British forces under Bernard Montgomery were stabilizing the northern shoulder of the German advance, but they were not positioned to strike south quickly. Other American armies were locked in desperate defensive battles simply to hold their lines. No one had the troops, the fuel, or the positioning to launch a major counteroffensive toward Bastogne on a timetable that matched the 101st's dwindling ammunition. No one except Third Army. Far to the south, Third Army was engaged in operations in the Saar region. To move on Bastogne, the entire army would need to disengage from its current fronts, pivot north, and drive through winter storms straight into the teeth of German forces. That meant one name: Patton. For years, Eisenhower had balanced Patton's brilliance against his volatility. The same man who could envision and execute audacious maneuvers could also ignite political disasters with a single remark or impulsive act. Eisenhower had reprimanded him, defended him, shielded him, and more than once seriously considered removing him from command. Managing George Patton was like trying to harness lightning. It was exhausting. But now, staring at the map ringed with grim black lines around Bastogne, Eisenhower knew he did not need a compliant or easily managed general. He needed lightning. "Get me Patton," Eisenhower ordered. "Tell him I want him in Verdun tomorrow for an emergency conference, and tell him to bring plans for offensive operations." He paused, then added quietly, "He'll know what that means." After his staff hurried out, Eisenhower remained alone in the dimly lit Situation Room. His aide, Harry Butcher, later recorded that he heard Eisenhower murmur under his breath, not as a distant commander, but as a man appealing to a dangerous ally. "George, for once, in this damned war, do exactly what I need you to do. Those paratroopers are counting on you. America is counting on you. I am counting on you. Do not let me down." The following day, December the 19th, the meeting at Verdun would enter legend. Historians would later recount the moment when Patton stunned the room with a promise that seemed impossible. But what is often overlooked is how Eisenhower responded, what he said, and just how much was truly at stake. The headquarters at Verdun hummed with officers, couriers, and staff, but the atmosphere inside the main conference room was tight and brittle. Around the table sat the men responsible for the Western Front, generals commanding hundreds of thousands of soldiers who had carried the Allied armies from Normandy to the edge of Germany. Eisenhower opened not with maps, but with psychology. He told them the situation must be viewed as an opportunity, not a calamity. It was a brave posture. Everyone present understood they were facing the most serious crisis since the morning of June 6, 1944. Then Eisenhower laid out the central problem. The German offensive had carved deeply into the Allied front, creating a vulnerable bulge. But it had also exposed German flanks to counterattack, if the Allies could move fast enough. Bastogne, sitting at the heart of the road network, had to be held. If it fell, the Germans could drive deeper and split the Allied front. If it held, the bulge could become a trap. "I want each of you," Eisenhower said, "to think carefully before answering. How soon can you launch an offensive to relieve Bastogne?" Most commanders immediately began calculating available divisions, road capacity, fuel stocks, ammunition, the time required to disengage units and redeploy them. It was a matter of days, possibly weeks. No one wanted to promise what could not be delivered. Then George Patton spoke. "I can attack on the 22nd, he said, "with 3 divisions." The room fell silent. Eyes turned toward him. Some officers assumed he was posturing, making an impossible claim to command attention. To disengage troops in contact, rotate an entire army 90 degrees, and drive nearly 100 miles through snow and ice to strike the flank of a German offensive in 3 days was, by any conventional standard, fantasy. Eisenhower did not smile. He locked eyes with Patton and spoke slowly. Each word weighted. "George, I am not asking for optimism. I am not asking what might be theoretically possible on a map. I am asking what you can actually accomplish. The lives of 10,000 American soldiers depend on your answer." He leaned forward. "The men of the 101st Airborne are surrounded, outnumbered, and running out of everything. If you say you will be there and you are not, they die. All of them." He paused. "I will ask again. Can you attack on the 22nd of December?" Patton did not hesitate. "Ike," he replied, "I already have 3 plans. My staff anticipated this possibility. We have war-gamed 3 separate contingencies for turning north. On the 22nd, my 4th Armored Division will be attacking toward Bastogne. That is not a guess. It is not a hope. It is a fact." Eisenhower studied Patton's face, searching for any trace of bluff or bravado. Instead, he saw something rare in Patton. Absolute, steel-edged certainty. Against every odd, the mercurial general had prepared for precisely this moment. "Very well, George," Eisenhower said at last. "You have your mission. Relieve Bastogne. You have full operational freedom to execute it as you see fit." Then his tone shifted. Everyone in the room felt it. "But understand this. If you fail, if those paratroopers die because you did not deliver what you promised, I will personally see that you never command troops again. Not merely relieved of Third Army. Finished. Am I clear?" "Crystal clear, sir," Patton replied. "I will not fail." Later, Eisenhower pulled his chief of staff, Walter Bedell Smith, aside. Smith's notes preserved the exchange. "The boss asked me if I thought George could really do it," Smith wrote. "I told him it sounded impossible. Ike said, 'That is why I am sending Patton. Impossible is what he does.'" What followed from December 20th through the 26th was, on paper, a sequence of movements and engagements. In reality, it was a race against a merciless clock. As Patton's staff worked frantically, issuing orders, rerouting traffic, reorganizing supply chains, and pivoting entire divisions on snow-choked roads, Eisenhower watched Bastogne from afar, living hour to hour on fragments of information. The reports were bleak. Artillery pounding American positions day and night. German infantry pressing closer under tank support. Ammunition shrinking with every fire mission. Medical officers pleading for bandages, morphine, blankets. Inside Bastogne, the acting commander of the 101st Airborne, General Anthony McAuliffe, received a written demand from German forces calling for surrender or annihilation. He scrawled a one-word reply that would become legendary. Nuts! When Eisenhower read the report, a tired smile briefly crossed his face. "At least their spirit isn't broken," he said to his staff. But spirit alone could not stop shells or bullets. Patton had to reach them. On December 22nd, exactly as promised, elements of Third Army launched their attack northward. They collided with everything winter, and the Wehrmacht could hurl at them. Ice-slick roads, demolished bridges, ambushes, entrenched anti-tank guns, and determined German rear guards. The advance was slower than anyone hoped. Inside Bastogne, conditions deteriorated further. Some units were reduced to a handful of rounds per rifle. Artillery batteries rationed every shell as though it were gold. Wounded men laid 2 or 3 to a stretcher, or directly on frozen floors and bare earth. Frost-bitten sentries, stared into blowing snow, knowing that somewhere beyond the White Veil, more German troops were assembling for the next assault. Eisenhower sent a message to McAuliffe: "Hold at all costs. Relief is on the way." But, in his private notes, he acknowledged the brutal truth. He had wagered everything on Patton. If Third Army failed to break through, Bastogne would fall, and the responsibility, in his mind, would rest squarely on the man who had authorized the attempt. On December 23rd, the skies over Bastogne finally cleared enough for transport aircraft to fly. C-47s thundered in at low altitude, dropping bundles of ammunition, medical supplies, and food. Paratroopers watched parachutes blossom overhead like slow-motion salvation. It bought time, but not much. German commanders, enraged by the stubborn American resistance, prepared renewed attacks. Adolf Hitler had ordered Bastogne taken at any cost. To him, the town was more than a tactical objective, destroying the elite American. Paratroopers there would prove Germany could still strike fear into Allied hearts. Eisenhower sent urgent messages to Patton. "George, I need maximum effort. The 101st cannot hold much longer. Whatever you are doing, do it faster." On paper, such words were just ink. In reality, they carried the weight of thousands of cold, hungry, exhausted men. By Christmas Eve, December 24th, Eisenhower looked years older than he had a week earlier. He attended a chapel service, attempting for a few moments to close his eyes and hear words of peace, while knowing men under his command were fighting and dying in the snow. Between hymns, he kept glancing toward the door, waiting for news. Reports from Patton's spearheads were cautiously hopeful, but still short of a breakthrough. They were closer now, but Bastogne remained encircled. That night, Eisenhower sat at his desk and began drafting letters he prayed he would never have to send. Conditional letters. Letters to families of men in the 101st he had personally met. Letters to chaplains. Letters to staff officers whose sons were trapped in the pocket. "I found him late," one aide later recalled, surrounded by half-written condolences. He looked up and said, "I hope to God I do not have to sign these." Christmas Day arrived and passed. December 25, 1944, should have been a day of carols and candlelight. For Eisenhower, it was a day of relentless tension. He checked messages during church services, immediately afterward, and late into the night. Still no definitive word. Third Army was closing in. The 101st Airborne was still holding, still surrounded. The margin for error had narrowed to almost nothing. December 26th dawned cold and gray. Late that afternoon, at 10 minutes before 5 o'clock, the telephone on Eisenhower's desk rang. His aide answered, listened briefly, then turned toward his commander with an expression that froze everyone in the room. "Sir," he said, "it's General Patton. He says it's urgent." Eisenhower seized the receiver. "Ike, we're through." Patton's voice came over the line, crackling with distance and restrained relief. 4th Armored made contact with the 101st at 1650 hours. "The corridor is narrow, but it's open. We're pushing supplies and reinforcements through now. Bastogne is relieved." For a heartbeat, perhaps two, Eisenhower said nothing. Those watching him saw his shoulders sag, as though a crushing weight had suddenly been lifted. His grip tightened on the phone, knuckles whitening. "George," he said finally, his voice unsteady, "say that again." "We're through to Bastogne," Patton repeated. "The Screaming Eagles are safe. They're battered, but they held. We got there in time." Eisenhower's reply was thick with emotion. "George, I thank God. Thank you. You did it. You saved them." Patton, never comfortable with open sentiment, deflected. "Just doing my job, Ike. Those paratroopers did the real work. We just opened the door." Eisenhower would not let him minimize it. "No, George, do not undersell this. You turned an entire army in a blizzard and broke through in 4 days. That is not merely doing your job. That is why you are indispensable. Difficult as hell, but indispensable." After the call ended, Eisenhower remained standing, staring at the map where a thin line now connected Third Army to Bastogne. Witnesses later recalled that his eyes were wet, and he made no effort to conceal it. "Gentlemen," he said to his staff, "General Patton has just accomplished something I will remember for the rest of my life. He saved 10,000 American soldiers who were hours, perhaps minutes, from annihilation. He did exactly what I asked him to do, when I asked him to do it, against odds everyone said were impossible. George S. Patton is the most difficult subordinate I have ever had. He is also, beyond question, one of the finest battlefield commanders this nation has produced." Messages immediately went out. Official congratulations to the 101st Airborne for their stubborn, nearly superhuman defense. Commendations to Third Army for their rapid and decisive relief operation. Reports to the War Department confirming that Bastogne had held and that the German offensive had been blunted. But Eisenhower also sat down to write something more personal, a direct telegram to Patton. "George," he wrote, "words cannot adequately express my gratitude and admiration for what Third Army has accomplished. You gave your word that you would be there, and you kept that word. In doing so, you saved not only 10,000 soldiers, but potentially the entire Ardennes campaign. Well done does not begin to cover it. This operation will be studied for generations as an example of operational genius. I am proud to have you under my command." Later that evening, Eisenhower's aide found him once more, standing alone, gazing at the same map. The line to Bastogne was now secured, reinforced, and widening. Eisenhower traced it with one finger and said quietly, almost to himself, 4 more hours. That was all he had. 4 more hours, and the 101st would have been overrun. Patton had arrived with 4 hours to spare. 4 hours separating salvation from annihilation. In the days that followed, Eisenhower's private remarks about Patton blended relief with a sober, almost clinical respect. To General George Marshall, the Army Chief of Staff in Washington, Eisenhower wrote candidly, "George Patton has just saved my command. Had Bastogne fallen with an entire airborne division destroyed, the psychological impact would have been catastrophic. Serious questions would have arisen about our strategy, our competence, and my leadership. Patton prevented that disaster. Whatever difficulties I have had with him, and they are many, this operation alone justifies every painful decision I have made to keep him in command." To Bernard Montgomery, coordinating operations on the northern flank, Eisenhower sent a carefully worded but pointed message. "Patton's relief of Bastogne is a clear demonstration of American operational capability. I know there have been questions regarding American effectiveness. Bastogne should put those questions to rest." The phrasing was diplomatic. The meaning was unmistakable. In his diary, Eisenhower was even more forthright. "There have been times," he wrote, "when I wanted to relieve him and be done with it. Times when I doubted whether he was worth the constant supervision and political strain. Bastogne answered that question. He is worth every frustration, every heated exchange, because when it mattered most, when 10,000 men stood on the brink, George delivered. Not eventually, not late, exactly when and how he said he would. That is the mark of a great commander." Patton received another note from Eisenhower in the new year, dated January 2, 1945. By then, The immediate crisis had passed, and the wider campaign was shifting once more. Yet Eisenhower's thoughts continued to return to Bastogne. "George," the letter read, "I have had time to reflect. What you accomplished goes beyond tactical brilliance. You gave hope to men who had every reason to believe they were abandoned. You proved that American forces could execute complex, high-speed operations under the worst imaginable conditions. You altered German perceptions of what we are capable of. Most importantly, you saved lives, not in theory, but in reality. Every man of the 101st who returned to his family after this war owes a part of that to your speed and aggression. That legacy outweighs any medal." Years later, in his memoir Crusade in Europe, Eisenhower devoted a full and respectful account to the Bastogne episode. He described the relief of the town by Patton's forces as one of the pivotal moments of the Western campaign. He emphasized the extraordinary speed with which Third Army disengaged from its original front, pivoted north, and attacked. Movements that military academies often discussed as theoretical exercises became reality in the snowbound Ardennes. In an interview given in the mid-1960s, not long before his death, Eisenhower was asked to identify the most agonizing command decision he had made during the war. He did not mention the launch of D-Day. He did not cite the selection of invasion beaches or the appointment of commanders. Instead, he said, "Trusting George Patton to relieve Bastogne. It was a gamble of the highest order. I was wagering the lives of 10,000 paratroopers and the stability of our entire position on a man who had often been difficult to control. But I also knew he was the only one who could do it in the time we had. When that phone call came, 'We are through to Bastogne,' I felt a relief and gratitude I still cannot fully describe. Those 4 words may have been the most important I heard during the entire war." In his final reflections, Eisenhower summarized the paradox of Patton in a few enduring lines. "Many generals of that war," he wrote, "would be remembered. Some for meticulous planning, some for political skill, some for steady competence. But only a few would be remembered for saving an entire division from destruction through sheer operational audacity. That," he said, "was Patton at Bastogne. Difficult, flawed, controversial, but also the man who refused to accept that 10,000 Americans were doomed. He gave his word that he would reach them, and he did. The relief of Bastogne was more than a maneuver traced on a winter map. It was the moment when a commander's faith in a difficult genius paid off. When raw talent, long tolerated and often feared, delivered a miracle others believed impossible. It was the intersection of stubborn courage in frozen foxholes and bold decision-making in distant command posts, all balanced on the edge of a ticking clock and a single phone line. If this story of impossible odds, desperate choices, and the words that forged legends resonated with you, stay with us. We are here to bring you the hidden moments, private conversations, and human drama behind history's greatest battles. Subscribe, tap the notification bell so you never miss the next episode. Leave a comment sharing what leadership under pressure means to you, and pass this along to someone who needs to be reminded that refusing to accept defeat can change everything. And remember, help us grow. Your super chats and super stickers directly support the channel and future content.